So hello everybody. I see that we have a lot of attendees just registering now, so I'm just going to leave it another few seconds before I start officially as the number ramps up. I can see here that everybody is, it's just letting people in one after another. So, okay. Leah, I'm just going to give it another few seconds because I can still see the attendees ramping up. So we have a whole range of people I can see coming in. It's brilliant to see all of the names coming in from a wide range of backgrounds. So I should start by saying my name is Linda Doyle. I'm the Dean of Research in Trinity College, Dublin, and I'm also the chair of the IUA VPs of Research Group. So I'm delighted to be here today with the Royal Irish Academy and the Irish Universities Association in hosting this event. And very delighted that we have a fantastic panel, which I will introduce to you in due course. We have over 300 attendees registered for the event, coming from all walks of life. We have a range of people coming from different government departments, from the funding agencies, across the educational sector, from the universities, from the Institutes of Technology, RCSI, to Dublin, various county councils, Knowledge Transfer Ireland, Met Éireann, the EPA, Accenture, IBEC. So a really, really great range of people. We have some politicians and people involved in making policy themselves. So there are a lovely bunch of people here with a lot of expertise. And I look very much forward to discussing how higher education and evidence-based policy making come together. I think we're also at a very, very exciting time where we have a new Department of Higher Education, Innovation and Research. And I think that allows us to kind of, I suppose, look forward. I think with great hope that this sector can become even stronger and play an even greater role as a public good. So I think it's very, very timely that today we are talking about higher education and evidence-based policy making. So I am going to, before we start, we have 2 short videos that we're going to play, and after those short videos, I'm going to introduce the panel. The first video is from the Provost of Trinity College, Patrick Pendergast, and he is chair of the IUA this year. And then we will have some comments from Dr. Mary Canning, who is president of the Royal Irish Academy.
Good morning. As chair of the Irish Universities Association, it's my pleasure to open this webinar. I congratulate the IUA and the RIA for bringing together such an impressive panel to address this vital issue. Among the most striking aspects of life under the pandemic has been the use of evidence-based policy making. Academics and researchers have seldom worked more closely with government. We're serving on national committees, and our expertise is visibly informing public policy, influencing political decision-making, and doing it all in real time. This marks a striking departure from the way things were pre-COVID. In certain countries, it had become fashionable to denigrate evidence, expertise, and empiricism. We had become used to political leaders using phrases like, "We have had enough of experts," and "alternative facts." We may like to congratulate ourselves in Ireland that we had not succumbed to this tendency. But let's be honest with ourselves. Even in universities, we can be guilty of overemphasizing presentation, personality, and spin at the expense of method, process, and rigor. We may deny this, but consider the students who get noticed and profiled in university life and go on to have stellar careers are often the charismatic, confident ones and not always the painstaking, methodical ones. In higher education, we need to be continuously vigilant as to the values we promote among staff and students and take nothing for granted, which is why this seminar is so welcome. It has taken a crisis to reaffirm the importance of evidence-based decision-making. When it comes to people's lives and health, it turns out that establishing the facts is essential. They aren't subjective. Expertise is vital, and personal charisma is overrated. But once a crisis has passed, the human tendency is to revert to the status quo. So I'm glad that the IUA and the RIA have seized this moment to ask how can we embed the learning from the past few months? Can we build processes and frameworks to ensure that the evidence and expertise that lies within our universities is available and accessible for decision-making processes? And can we, as individuals and educators, and as institutions, show that we truly value evidence and empiricism? It's one thing to create an independent research advisory group for government. It's another to demonstrate collectively as a society, through our actions, decision-making and teaching, that we genuinely value that approach. I look forward to a really great discussion. Thank you.
As a scientific and scholarly academy, we believe that science is a public good, and that as an academy, we have a responsibility to contribute our expertise and knowledge to the collective endeavour to tackle the many challenges that now face our society. In May of this year, the Academy called for the creation of an independent scientific network of advisors to provide evidence-based insights to assist government in understanding policy problems more completely, to generate and evaluate options, and to provide meaning to the discussion around critical topics within society. Of course, scientists and researchers from all disciplines already contribute to public discussion in many ways in Ireland. But could science create an even better interface with academia? And what of the wider context in which policy making happens? How far can science really inform or influence policy making? These issues will be thoroughly debated today, and before discussions begin, I would like to remark upon the tremendous public trust that scientists generally enjoy. With this trust comes great responsibility, most particularly to ensure the independence, integrity, and rigor of the evidence used, and to be clear about what and how the science can and indeed cannot explain at a given moment in time. This seems also like an appropriate moment to pause and pay tribute to Professor Philip Nolan, who will participate in today's discussion. We need to thank him for his authoritative and calm public presence as he unwound and explained to the public at large the intricacies and implications of the vital modelling informing so much of government's decision-making during this pandemic. And I should also note that Philip, at the same time, is being the president of Maynooth University, so his role is truly extraordinary. As his and many other scientists and academics responding to the pandemic, as his work has so clearly demonstrated, access to adequate, rigorous, and independent evidence and expertise can make an enormous contribution to better policy making, including building public understanding of the complexities and challenges facing policymakers. We hope that today's discussion will provide a small step towards an even better understanding of these issues, and I look forward very much to the engagement that follows. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Paddy and Mary for taking the time to record a message for us. And now we'll get down to the main business. So just before I do, just to introduce the panel, just to explain the format, each of the panel members is going to do a short 5-minute little talk on key issues that matter to them. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. There's a Q&A tool that you can use to put up any questions. And we've also actually got some questions that people sent in advance. So I'm going to introduce the panel. So the first member of our panel is Philip Nolan. As everybody knows, as I was calling him earlier when we were waiting to broadcast, he's a TV personality who we all see every night in our living rooms at this stage, but also president of Maynooth University. And as Mary mentioned there earlier, he's doing a fantastic job on the Epidemiological Modelling Advisory Group, which is so important in dealing with the crisis that we face at the moment. So we're delighted that Philip has had time to come and join us today. So it's Philip Nolan. We also have Professor Alan Reilly. So Alan was a former CEO of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland from 2009 to 2015. And currently he's chairman of the Scientific Advisory Board of the European Food Information Council. So Alan has a huge, I suppose, track record of working very closely with academics in driving policy. So we really, really look forward to hearing from him. Following Alan, we will have Jasmina Behan. So Jasmina is from Dept, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and she's head of what's known as the Irish Government Economic and Evaluation Service, IGES, as many people will know. And Jasmina is really focused on capacity building across the Irish civil servants, making sure that we get value for money, and I suppose driving us to be our best through evidence-based policy making, very much at the heart of what she does. And then finally, from the UK and from UCL, University College London, we have Professor David Price. So David is also the VP of Research for Research in UCL and is chair of the LIRU Committee of Vice Rectors for Research. And he's also head of UCL Public Policy. And I had the opportunity to visit UCL and to hear a lot about UCL Public Policy, and it's a fantastic structure within the university, which very much connects UCL with policy professionals and informs policy with evidence. So we really look forward to hearing from David as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to start by handing over to Philip, and then we'll just move from one panel to the other and then have the questions at the end. So Philip, over to you.
Thanks very much, Linda, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute. I'll keep my remarks very short. I'm just going to frame some reflections on not quite what I've learned yet, because it's too early to have learned it, but what the crisis or my involvement in public health has prompted. I need to caveat it first. I mean, this is a case study in evidence and expertise informing public policy, but it's a very particular one. So COVID-19 is unique in it was unexpected. It's not like climate change where we've had more than ample warning it's coming and it's here. COVID, we had warnings, but we didn't expect something like this to arrive late February, early March. So it's unexpected. The pace, the intensity of needing to respond, and also we're really set back by the lack of evidence. It's a novel virus that behaves differently from other coronaviruses. So not only do we lack evidence about the behavior of this virus, we have some bad evidence. And a lot of the time it's really expertise-based policy as opposed to evidence-based policy, because the evidence isn't quite in yet. A couple of remarks that would not surprise you. I got a phone call on a Sunday morning from the Chief Medical Officer to say what expertise was available to the country. And by the following Wednesday, we'd mobilized a very diverse team: mathematicians, statisticians, epidemiologists, infectious disease modelers. Where do you find an infectious disease modeler in a small country on a Sunday morning? So I was even surprised we had some of these things, to be quite honest, microeconomists, experts in public health. The first thing, what's extraordinarily important, and it's obvious, and university leaders say it all the time, is the necessity of maintaining a broad base of expertise in the country. So evidence-based policy requires the input of every discipline, some more than others in particular circumstances. And I'll come back to that point towards the end. So you need to maintain a broad base of expertise. Your funding strategy for research needs to ensure that you have statisticians when you need them, that you have disease modelers when you need them, and you never know when you're going to need them. So maintaining that broad base. And then on the specific issue of, and David alluded to it in the discussion beforehand, ensuring that that expertise base is funded and rewarded for engaging in policy relevant and policy engaged research. The second thing is the need to have people who are capable of integration and transdisciplinarity, who can have those very diverse disciplines with their separate technical languages talk to each other. The third is the extraordinary value of their international networks. The expertise that our colleagues gave us access to in Sweden, London, Toronto was extraordinary. And also the formal networks that we've built, and particularly the supranational networks, we would have been days behind in certain critical decisions if it hadn't been for the European Centres for Disease Control synthesizing the evidence from across Europe and delivering it to us. There's a fourth point which I think is worth making. In this country, the courage shown by the politicians to keep the scientific briefings and the political briefings separate. So it's entirely different for me as providing evidence to stand up and be able to deliver that evidence to the public, frankly, without the politician standing beside me, because you never undermine a politician in public. It's not fair to them or to you. So our independence of the political system, but at the same time being related to it and trying to enable it is important. Just the things that surprised me, and perhaps they shouldn't have, the public service capacity for policy making here is quite extraordinary. And there are graduates, the skill set in the public service. So I've come across people with everything from doctoral degrees in statistics to economics to public health. And the absorptive capacity in the system for an engagement from the academic sector is quite extraordinary. They know us, they've studied with us, and they're enormously talented. I'm not just saying that because there's one on the panel. It's been quite stunning. And then I think I'll conclude on two things. I've also been really impressed by the formal processes that there are for linking academic work and policy work. We were fortunate in this country. Somebody had the vision some years back to fund a doctoral program in sphere in population science, public health. Our response to COVID is literally populated by graduates of that one program. So structured doctoral training in policy relevant and policy engaged research reaps enormous rewards down the line. They're working in HIQA, the Health Information and Quality Agency here is producing evidence syntheses that are European standard. In other words, they're now being taken by our European colleagues as the gold standard for evidence synthesis. And just a final comment, we might come back to it in the discussion. There is an interaction between kind of prestige, funding, and capacity. Public health has not been a prestigious part of the medical profession, quite frankly. So it's an underfunded part of the system. I think we need to be very careful. It's not just about where we place funding, it's where as a society we allocate prestige is really important. And then the gap. The expertise that we haven't sufficiently mobilized is the expertise in the humanities and social sciences. You know, for instance, we get a lot of colleagues here talking about test, trace, and isolate. The problems with test, trace, and isolate are partly technical. You've got to understand the limitations of testing, but they're intensely sociological. You know, if you live in a society that's used to surveilling its citizens, then it works in one way. If you live in, frankly, a post-colonial society where your citizens have a long history of evading surveillance, it works another way. So there's an important gap, I think, where we've mobilized the scientific expertise, and partly because of the rhythms of social science research and humanities creativity, that's a little bit late to the table and at the table in a much less structured way. So hopefully those thoughts are enough to prompt some discussion later.
Thank you, Philip. I think you brought up so many things there. We could spend hours going through each one of them, but thank you. It's very, very interesting. Alan, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Many of the points that have been made by Philip, I will also be referring to. What I want to do is to just go through some slides here to talk about evidence-informed policy, but underpinning food safety and food regulations. Really, this is an example of a success story where we've managed to use evidence-based to underpin, as I say, the policy related to food safety. We need to go back to 1995 to look at this historically. When the World Trade Organization was set up, this was set up really to establish a level playing field for food trade. This was to try and get evidence base for making decisions with respect to disputes in food trade, rather than having subjective decisions made by politicians. We needed some form of an evidence base to underpin such policy. The World Trade Organization, under the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement, set up technical regulations for protecting human health, plant health, and animal health. And they introduced a concept called risk assessment. And really, risk assessment has been underpinning the evidence-based policy decisions with respect to food safety and food regulations. In 1995, very few people knew what risk assessment was. These three international bodies picked up the problem and developed risk assessment tools for food, the Codex Alimentarius, for plant health, the International Plant Protection Convention, and for animal health, the OIE. So these three international bodies, which are populated by expert scientists from around the world, but they developed the tools for risk assessment. In addition, at national level, excuse me, the Food Safety Authority of Ireland was set up, and there are many functions that the Food Safety Authority had, but one of the functions was advice to government ministers. And really, it was advice on food safety matters, food safety issues of the day. The Food Safety Authority was set up as an independent agency. It was independent in the exercise of its functions. So Philip made this point that you have to separate those people who are providing the policy from those people who are providing the evidence base. And essentially, in setting up the Food Safety Authority, this is how Ireland addressed this problem. And then we had a scientific committee, which was made up of independent experts. So we had this separation of functions between the providers of the evidence base from those who are actually making decisions. I want to give you a specific example of where this worked, and it works extremely well. And this was in informing scientific data, how to generate the scientific data to inform policy and food standards. In the early 90s, the Irish University Nutrition Alliance was set up by the University of Ulster, Sean Strain, Trinity College Dublin, Mike Gibney, and Albert Flynn from University College Cork. So those three were the leaders that set up this Irish University Nutrition Alliance. They put together the Food Consumption Survey of Ireland, the National Food Consumption Survey of Ireland. In a nutshell, they went out to look at the quantities of food people were eating and the types of food people were eating. This is extremely important from the point of view of setting standards. Like if you have a pesticide, if you have a contaminant in the food, You really need to know the level of that contaminant, and you need to know the quantity of foods that people are eating in order to make a decision, whether you're setting a standard in regulations or whether you're withdrawing foods from the market or whatever. This National Food Consumption Survey formed the basis of the National Food Consumption Database. And with that National Food Consumption Database, the Food Safety Authority used that, you know, and still uses it to this day. But the key issue when you have a crisis, we had in place this database in 2008. We had dioxin contamination of pork. We had to withdraw 25% of all the pork produced from Irish pigs in 2008. From August to December 2008, we had to withdraw from the market. We knew from this analysis that we didn't have a major public health problem, but we knew we couldn't leave the products on the market because we would have a problem. This database was funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine through their Food Institutional Research Measure. Now, you know, that database has gone on really to save our agri-food industry. Whenever we have a crisis to do with contaminant levels and so on in foods, this is the basis of the decision-making process. And really the foresight to put that in place, you know, to manage crisis was really excellent. How do you develop the scientific evidence base? And look, this is my last slide. Let me say the successful formula here is broad consultation between the funding agencies, the research institutions, and the end users. And that consultation must take place, and it must be a genuine consultation to try and identify what the problems are, maybe what the emerging risks coming down the tracks, and so on. We need collaboration, and that is, you know, essential. You know, to identify priorities, and you know, we also need transparency. The whole idea that this process has to be transparent. How do you make decisions? You know, who gets funding and so on. So transparency, to have confidence in the system, is really important. Continuity of expertise. Those three guys from the universities, they have since retired. So, you know, there are others taking up the baton now and running with it. But the expertise, the numbers of PhD students that have got their degrees and are now populating the key positions, not only in universities, but also in the large Irish agri-food industry, is a huge success story. Continuity of funding is really key. It must be there. Networking, and Philip mentioned networking with the ECDC, I mean, say networking with the like of the European Food Safety Authority and other agencies internationally, because we won't have all the data, we won't have all the tools and so on for doing this risk assessment to develop this scientific evidence base to underpin policy and food regulations. And we need to have successful outcomes. We need the risk assessment tools, and we need the databases, the information on which we're going to make our decisions. And I would say that's the formula for success. And if you follow that broad formula, I think will be certainly a successful outcome. Thank you very much for listening. Let me go back and stop sharing my screen.
I think very, very interesting ways of separating the decision making and the evidence there, and a fantastic example. And in discussions with Alan, I really learned much more about how this kind of science actually played a huge role in the Irish economy and in saving the agricultural sector at times. So I think it's great to hear that. So now we're going to hand over to Jasmina. Jasmina, are you okay to start?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to tell you about the Irish Government Economic and Evaluation Service, which was established in 2012 in response to then financial crisis and the need to build up the capacity within the civil service to provide data and evidence to inform policy making. So and that is the mission of the Irish Government Economic and Evaluation Service, to drive evidence-informed policy making in the Irish civil service. And since we were established in 2012, we have been working hard to build that capacity, and now we have over 200 policy analysts in all so across all government departments. So we have presence in all government departments, and we have built that capacity through recruitment and adding skills, mostly graduates in disciplines like economics and social sciences and statistics, to whatever was existing resource within government departments at the time. So we recruit people, and then we also do a lot of learning and development to ensure that we can kind of grow and nurture the skills that we have in the service. People that we have in IGs work hard to produce analytical output using data and the techniques that they have available to them in terms of their skills to generate insights that they can then share with policymakers. We use that output then, we publish it, usually in the form of papers and reports, but we use it to inform internal discussions and then a broader public policy debates. We have collaborations with academia. Obviously, academia plays an important role in providing skills for our recruitment stream, but also collaboration in terms of sharing evidence that's available in through academic institutions and research institutions, and trying to integrate that in the work of IGs as well. So what we're trying to do, so we build a capacity, but the idea is we're building capacity, I'd say still work in progress, but the idea being that we would use data and use our skills and data to inform all stages of the policymaking process, and that includes helping policymakers define the problem that they're trying to solve, then helping them look at options that they have and how to address the problem, then help them monitor how that is evolving in terms of cost, in terms of outputs, and then using our techniques that are available to us and data to try to look back and through evaluation provide some insights on whether we have actually managed to achieve objectives that we set out when we identified the problem. So the guiding principles for us and the work of IGs is to make sure that in the provision of public services and the use of public money, we're doing the right thing and that we're doing it right. And that means that we're trying to, I suppose, look at policies through the lens of identifying what the rationale really is, how efficient the provision is, what are the outputs, outcomes, impacts, and how sustainable a particular policy is. So in terms of embedding evidence to inform policy making, the building blocks obviously contain the supply side, which is what we're trying to do through building the capacity, having the skills, the data, the timeliness, the communication, dissemination of evidence within the civil service. And then obviously another building block that's very important is the demand side. So we need people who want to engage with what we do, what we produce and the insights that we have, and we want them to include those into their information set when they're making decisions around public policy. And there are usually constraints, be it cognitive, motivational, time constraints, structural constraints. So there's a lot of constraints on the demand side. And this is something that for us, for a number of years, we've been kind of grappling with the question of how do we create a more effective bridge between the analysis and evidence that we produce and the use of that evidence in the policy making. And the COVID crisis has created an opportunity for us to actually show what we're doing in a timely manner, feed into the policy discussions, and help shape the policy responses to COVID. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But just kind of rewinding back now, in December 2019, and this is just to contextualize the work of IGs, the budget was agreed in October last year, with the budget of 80 billion, of which 10 billion was to be spent to service debt and EU payments, and that left 70 billion to the government to provide public services. And just over 20 billion at the time was allocated to social protection, 18 billion to health, and 11 billion to education. So these are the biggest spending streams from the Exchequer. And, you know, I put that in the context just to give a sense, you know, we have 70 billion, or we had 70 billion at the time. And the question is always, you know, how do you divvy up that money? What are the priorities? And when you think about the policy space and the voices around that, at the time, you know, you had things like Brexit and healthcare and housing and climate and inequality and all those kind of things, you know, being discussed when you were talking about how do we distribute the money and, you know, what are the priorities. Obviously in March, then all of those voices were dwarfed by the public health emergency that was that emerged with COVID-19. And as I said, that actually then created an opportunity for IGs to, in a very timely fashion, I suppose, you know, we could mobilize the capacity that we had to actually, in a very meaningful way, help policymakers who at the time then were actually seeking information to see what's the best way to respond to this crisis. The crisis was, I suppose, you know, the response that was needed in terms of policy was primary healthcare response. But it was also to do with how we're going to support the economy through this crisis, and primarily in terms of the issues around the liquidity for households and liquidity for enterprise sector. So we were then, I suppose, after building the capacity over so many years and pushing our evidence upwards, there was an opportunity for us because there was suddenly a pull factor for that evidence, and I have to say it was really heartening to see how IG's resources across the system were feeding into the process. So IG's people in the Department of Health were supporting, and I have been supporting the National Public Health Emergency Team. And that's obviously, you know, it was great that we had a number of economists and others in the Department of Health would be mobilized to support the work of the team. But in other departments, IG's people were working on other policy areas. So for instance, in the Department of Finance, the question was around what was the macroeconomic impact, what can we expect in terms of economic developments, in terms of the broad macro indicators and the fiscal sustainability, in terms of the impact on the households and the labour market. IG's people in the Department of Social Protection, Finance, Revenue, Department of Public Expenditure were grappling with what the policy response should be to help the liquidity of households. And here we've seen measures like the pandemic unemployment payment and the temporary subsidy scheme as some of the measures that where the IGs were kind of fed in. On the enterprise side, and this is something that we're going to be grappling in the, sorry, yeah, I'm finishing, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Is around the enterprise.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for talking.
So just to finish, the challenge now is, the challenge is how to sustain now this gain that we've made in terms of feeding evidence into policy and making sure that we kind of build on that and continue to champion evidence-informed policy making. Sorry for going over time.
No, thank you. You can, or thank you. No problem. You can see how everyone is very passionate about policy, and so it's good to see that. So finally, we're just going to come on to David and hear a few words from him, and then we'll open it up to questions.
So thank you very much for inviting me. For those of you who don't know, UCL is a large multi-faculty comprehensive university in the centre of London. We have something like 3,000 academic staff, 4,000 postdocs and 5,000 PhD students. So it's quite a large research community. The research strategy for UCL is threefold. First, to be the destination of choice for any researcher at any stage in their career. Second, to be more than the sum of our parts. That is, to ensure that such a large community actually interacts in a cross-disciplinary way, to build on their disciplinary excellence. And the third part is to ensure that we make an impact with our research for the benefit of society. And for us, that impact is one of 5 things. It's a scholarly impact, it's pedagogical impact, it's innovation and enterprise impact, it's public engagement, and it's public policy. And the reason that public policy features in our strategy so strongly is that in the UK, we have the thing called the Research Excellence Framework, which is once every 5 to 7 years national flagellation of the research community. And in 2014, we had to create what were called impact case studies. And it turned out that a quarter of UCL's impact case studies were public policy based. But we had no idea that that was going to be the outcome. And the reason why it got important to us is that those impact case studies generate tens of millions of pounds per year for the institution through our governmental block grant. Therefore, not knowing what you're doing in public policy turns out to be quite a significant vulnerability. As a result, we created the UCL public policy activity in my office. First of all, to find out what it was that we were doing, because there were so many people doing valuable stuff. We had no idea institutionally what it was. Secondly, was to try to find ways to help those people who were doing successful public policy to do it better. And we did that by, for example, facilitating and creating UCL-based commissions, which use the expertise of our academics colleagues, but worked with government or former governmental employees. So, for example, we created the UCL mission on orientated innovation and industrial strategy, led by Mariona Mazzucato and Lord David Willetts, who had previously been a Minister for Science. We then also recognized that we needed to try to train those other people who might be interested in public policy, but didn't have the skills. So we've engaged with internships and networking within departments in Whitehall, but also in regional government, so that we send our academics and our researchers into those departments for a period. And also, interestingly, there's been a significant desire to have placements from those departments back into university groups to find out more. And then finally, what we're doing now, and it's going to be launched on Thursday, so it's a press embargo, so I can't really give you all of the details, but we are about to launch a national network which involves UCL and a number of other universities and elements of government to try to establish best practice for embedding public policy activity within universities, and also finding the best ways of engaging with regional and national government to enhance the ecosystem in this area. So as a central part of, if you like, knowledge exchange, business innovation and so forth is well established. Public engagement in the UK is probably well established, but public policy is still, if you like, the underfunded, under-resourced third arm of knowledge exchange. And we're hoping to try and lead that into the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I know that people will be dead keen to hear more about what you launch on Thursday as well. It sounds like a fantastic initiative, and I love the way there's kind of a regional as well as a national perspective to it, which I think would be very interesting to us here in Ireland. So we have a lot of questions and we only have about 15 minutes. So I am going to try and ask the panelists. I'm going to use the questions from the Q&A and take a couple that came in advance. And I'm just going to direct it to one panel member for quick answers. And then if anyone else wants to get in, just wave and I'll include them as well. Philip, I might start with you. There are many questions here that people are asking, but we have been asked, when evidence of different fields requires contradictory policies, you know, how do we have a transparent discourse? And I'm sure some of that has come up in the COVID-19 context as well. Easy question for you there to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reality, isn't it? And most intelligent people and most politicians I've met are intelligent people, are capable of listening to contestation and debate and then reaching a judgment, I think it's very important to distinguish between kind of deliberate contrarianism and genuinely contested. The most important thing to do is take the ego out of the room in these circumstances, and that's difficult to do at times. But fundamentally, almost all evidence is contested to a greater or lesser degree. And the best thing to do is have those discussions. Sometimes it's necessary to have those discussions behind closed doors because too much contestation in the public mind, and sometimes they throw their hat at the argument and say, well, these people have no idea. They, in other words, doubt can be confused with utter uncertainty. So I think it's important to have expert, open challenge and debate. Stage one, within whatever group is formulating the advice. Stage two, with the administrative and political system, with them in it, not necessarily to provide a complete synthesis to deliver to them, but say, we have uncertainty here, different categories of evidence, different qualities of evidence, and different judgments on what that evidence is telling us. And here are our differing judgments. And you're going to have to make a decision. And then to a certain extent, it's difficult to dissect out what parts of a debate are a matter for expert judgment and what parts of a debate are a matter for public choice, if you know what I mean. And what's the role of the political system as delegates of the public in making those choices on behalf of the public, and what's the circumstances in which you have the debate in public itself. That last piece, I have to say, I simply find challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
As opposed to having an answer for it.
Yeah. It's maybe we'll move on to a question. There's a question here from Richard Boyle, and it's talking about evidence in complex policy areas is often partial and fragmented and evolving. And I think this is on the minds of many people at the moment because of the very dynamic situation we're in. And Richard asks, what processes and structures work best to make sure that policymakers are kept updated on the evolving evidence base in real time? I mean, I don't know whether Alan or Jasmina might have some comments to make on that.
Well, look, when you're in the middle of a crisis, you're never ever going to have sufficient scientific data to make, a judgment. And sometimes, if you go too soon with an opinion or with a policy, you'll be criticized. If you don't go soon enough, you'll be criticized. So there's a certain element of luck, when managing a crisis and when putting information into the public domain. Look, it's like right now. It's like trying to build an airplane and fly the airplane at the same time. We don't have sufficient time to put every particular theory into practice and make sure it's copper fastened and so on. So it's an extremely difficult time, and even those areas where we have policy and we have knowledge, maybe those the outputs of that are not being implemented. And I'm thinking in terms of the food industry and some of the outbreaks that we're having in some of the larger meat plants and so on globally, where the actual evidence is not being transferred into policy, and we're having the situation that we have in many different large meat plants contributing to keeping the pandemic going. But it's an extremely difficult area. You could probably talk forever on it if but having sufficient data to make those policy decisions is not always easy in the middle of a crisis, and I think this is being demonstrated now with COVID-19. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe then we kind of come back to what people are calling normal times, if there is ever such a thing again. So I think we're very focused at the moment of kind of, I suppose, the very rapid responses. But there is an interesting question here from Reilly, and she's talking about that while the government, I'll call it out, it's that about the departments are open to advice and expertise from academia in the context of the pandemic. She points out in normal times this often does not appear to be the case on topics of interest to the sector, and it picks out one that's very close to a lot of our hearts, the funding of higher education and research. And so first of all, I would ask the question, how in normal times, I can completely see in a time of crisis where we call on help in a much more open way, how in normal times do we kind of keep that or make that more meaningful? And how can we learn from this dialogue to improve, I learned from this crisis, I suppose, to improve the dialogue. David, do you want to, I mean, you have a good normal time system, I assume.
Yes, so in the UK, and I'm not sure if it's true in Ireland, every Department of State has a Chief Scientific Advisor. And it's really important for us at UCL to have good personal dialogues with the scientific advisors in the different departments of transport or the environment and so forth. So that is, if you like, an entry point for some, if you like, academic discussion. But the important thing is...
Can I interrupt you there a second? Maybe you'd say a little bit about that structure in the UK, that there are scientific advisors in every department, just so people hear.
Or nearly all. I think maybe the Treasury is a bit slack in that, but yes. So there will be it's normally a position which is perhaps held by a former academic who goes on to a 4-year secondment or career change, and is there to provide insight, particularly in places like DEFRA, which is our environment and foods agencies and so forth. And so there is always somebody there who is one can talk to. Whether or not they are themselves listened to as attentively within their department, that's a more variable feast. But I think it's just finding the, if you like, the potential networks, and that's why we're developing this project across the UK, to ensure that we can find the best ways of communicating with government and the departments. And often departments themselves need to have communication, because many times problems of transport and problems of planning are actually integrated, but because the departments are governmentally segregated, they can't always find the right solution because of that. So we can help in those areas.
Thank you. There's a question in here as well from a PhD student. I think it's interesting, and that PhD student said they have a medical background, and what steps should they follow if they want to be involved in public policy making and public health? I think it is interesting to think, if you are motivated and want to do that, what do you do next? Any advice? Yeah, Jasmina, do you have any, I know from being in the sector yourself?
Sorry, I think this is more probably for Professor Philip Nolan on public health. You know, I can probably talk more about for opportunities for economists, statisticians, and social scientists, because that's where IJs is, I suppose. Kind of trying to generate evidence, and it's just to add to some of the previous discussion. Not only that the evidence can be contradictory, so that you can have, on the one hand, one piece of evidence pointing in one direction and the other in the other. There is always a question around, what choices do you have to trade-offs? So you might actually decide in a particular area that this is what is a good thing to do, and making a judgment based on the scientific evidence in that area. But there is also the question of, trade-offs. If you do that, you may not be able to do something else. And that's why I was kind of bringing in the budget into the discussion, because there are always choices to be made, and bringing that dimension complicates even further the discussion and the decision making.
I think you're very right, and I think as members of the public, you don't often see those trade-offs, or what is being traded off. I think it's a very important point.
I think.
Yeah, go on, Philip.
So just I think the advice to people is, yes, apply for a job in ICWA, the Department of Health. You'll be joining a really talented team. But I think I too am really looking forward. I think what is the peacetime version of the wartime event we've mobilized here. And I think I'm really heartened to hear David's contribution that the UK is trying to think through. I think he's put his finger on it. We know pretty well how to do enterprise engagement. We know pretty well how to do public engagement, and we're pretty poor at seeing the public service broadly writ as a research partner and a destination for our graduates and all those kinds of things. And to build on a point he made, it's worth us thinking about, what would the chief science officer in the Department of Justice look like? You know, so people are asking, what's the role of sociology and so on? You know, the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves as a society as we emerge from this is, what do we mean by science as it relates to government? And what is the scientific advisory structure? If you take a very holistic view of what science is, what is the scientific advisory structure to government, and how do we engage with it? I think that would be a useful question for us to reflect on in the coming months.
Yeah, if I could just come in, the problems which all governments face are relating to society and the people. And therefore, if you don't understand humanities and social sciences, you cannot find solutions to the problems which government face. Technology is really important, but it's the social sciences that should guide you as how they can be implemented.
Exactly. That's my rhetorical point. You know, when there is a sociologist embedded in the Department of Justice advising the senior team there, then we've taken a huge step forward as a society.
So I think you bring it to, I'm conscious of the time, but in terms of bringing a couple of questions together that have come up online and previously, I suppose there's a lot of comment on what can we learn? What should we do within the higher education research system to do things better? And there's been quite a few comments as well about chief scientific advisor roles, and I think taking up from the point you made, Philip, there as well, and David made. What should that advisory system look like going forward? And I think we're at a particularly interesting juncture where I think this conversation really does matter in forming our new department, which somebody asked me earlier, what's the exact name of the new department? And quoting the minister himself, it currently seems to be the Department of Higher Education and Further Education, Research, Innovation and Science. All of that is what I'm just quoting from Minister Harris's Twitter feed and that. But I think we're at a really, really good opportunity to look and say, what should that structure, that scientific advisory structure, research advisory structure look like going forward? So maybe what we will just do in the last few minutes, if I could just go through the panelists and you would say, with that in mind, what would be the best piece of advice you could give to us in the higher education system going forward? And the things that we should do in improving this research policy interface. David, will I start with you? Are you okay to?
Yes, I think I wouldn't dare give advice nationally, but what I would say is that what I think is good practice in universities is to ensure that one rewards those who contribute not only to, if you like, discovering new results, but also translating those into socially important ways, and therefore rewarding and promoting people on the basis of the success they have in public policy is something which not every university has yet adopted, but I think it's essential.
Absolutely true. Alan, have you any further advice other than your perfect formula or the winning formula at the end of your slides?
Well, certainly going back over the years, I think dialogue between those funding agencies who will have priorities, dialogue with the university structure and research institutions to ensure that they have the capacity to carry out research to meet those needs, and then talking with the end users of that research and making sure that there's clarity in that whole, if you like to call it, dialogue structure. I think that's extremely important. In addition, you need somebody to be doing something like crystal ball gazing, so emerging risk analysis, and having a sufficient cadre of scientists, whether at national level or European level, that are looking down the track and thinking what's coming next, and have we got the resources and so on to deal with the next crisis, if you want to call it that. But I think that's certainly from the agri-food sector, that's been a fairly successful formula to follow. Thank you.
Jasmina, have you anything to add as last words or pieces of advice for us?
Sorry, from IG's point of view, higher education, very important partner, both in terms of pipeline of skills. And in that regard, I would just say, thinking about, the content of the modules that actually contain those kind of questions, that people start with the question when they're studying disciplines. Why do we have inequality? How do we, why do we have homelessness? Why do we have, bringing the real sort of policy challenges into the body of the work that undergraduates do, to actually, so the techniques that they use, that know why they're actually, how they can actually be useful in trying to help us generate evidence that can make these policies better.
Thank you. That's very good advice. And Philip, some final words from you.
So so I agree with all the things that have been said, and I would particularly like to emphasize David's two contributions. One, the importance of really rewarding engaged scholarship, but also really looking forward to the outputs of that best practice analysis. Policy is one of those wonderful things. It's legitimate to plagiarize it. You don't feel guilty at all when you do. But two other things. I think the extraordinary value of doctoral training programs that are focused on public policy, the return on that investment for the state is really quite extraordinary. And then just to reiterate, if we pay careful attention in the coming 2 years to the kind of advisory structure to government, it doesn't have to be huge. It's a modest number of people, properly connected and properly distributed. We could find a much more efficient docking between groups of colleagues across the higher education sector and those really talented people. I think Jasmina makes a really important point that what our expertise can do can refine the trade-offs that need to be made. They can quantify them and clarify them. And then it's a political and public decision. Which of these things do we want? How much carbon tax are we going to pay? How much are we going to use public transport? Those kinds of things. So it's been a great discussion.
Yeah. So can I, this discussion has been far too short. You all have been absolutely excellent, and I could take any one of your points and ask you 100 questions about each of those points. So I just want to thank you very, very much. There's a great amount of expertise and insight on this panel, and I've learned a huge amount. So thank you so much for your time. I'd also like to thank the audience. We got many more questions than we could answer. So what I'm going to suggest we do is that we're going to keep all of the questions, and we're going to actually create a short document of things that we can answer as we go along, because I think some of the questions are just fantastic, and they really force us to think about what we want for ourselves from the sector as well. So we will follow up with those questions. I think it would be well worth it. I mean, the thing I've learned the most from today is that there is so much more to talk about, that the research policy interface is so exciting, that it really can affect people's lives in ways that really matter, and that there is an awful lot to give from the sector and from the government departments. And I think us working together in an even stronger way can only be better for Ireland and for the world at large. So thank you very much to the Royal Irish Academy for co-hosting this with the Irish Universities Association, and to Leah for her work in behind the scenes. Thank you again to the fantastic panelists, and thank you to the audience. And I hope everyone goes away with something new from this. So thank you.